Jeremy Clarkson is currently waiting on a council decision for something no landowner should have to justify more than once: a car park on his own property that visitors genuinely need because his farm draws serious crowds. And the paperwork behind this single application reveals just how much bureaucratic friction one man has had to push through simply to stop his own customers blocking a public road. What makes this story worth telling isn't the celebrity name attached to it. It's the fact that thousands of farmers across England are quietly fighting the same battles, with far fewer resources and absolutely no television cameras to document it. Here's the line that matters most, straight from Clarkson's team. In the current application, Season 6 has been commissioned and will broadcast in summer 2027. Good news on that front. Clarkson's Farm Season 6 is actively in production right now. 3 additional years to monitor and review after that seems a reasonable ask. This isn't someone trying to game the system. This is a farmer giving the council a precise, honest timeline anchored to a broadcast date that's already public knowledge. Both sides know exactly what's being approved and for how long. No ambiguity. A defined window, openly explained. The transparency here is almost disarming. Most applicants in planning disputes are deliberately vague, buying themselves wiggle room. Clarkson's team did the opposite. They handed the council a calendar and said, "Here's exactly what we need. Here's exactly why. Here's exactly when it ends." Let that sit for a moment. 3 years, stated clearly on the record by a business that has been straight with the council from the very beginning. There's something almost quietly dignified about that. You can agree or disagree with Jeremy Clarkson, the television personality, but the version of him that shows up in these planning documents is methodical, transparent, and remarkably patient for someone who has been through what he's been through. So here's what's actually happening. It starts with a car park that should never have required this many rounds of applications, on a piece of land that was never treated like a regular field to begin with. Diddly Squat sits within the Cotswolds area of outstanding natural beauty. That single designation places tougher planning restrictions on Clarkson's land than the vast majority of English farms will ever encounter. Every gravel patch, every fence line, every parking request has to clear a significantly higher bar than it would almost anywhere else in the country. That's not inherently wrong. AONBs exist for a reason. The Cotswolds landscape is genuinely worth protecting, and the rules that govern it are designed with that purpose in mind. But those same rules, when applied without any flexibility or common sense, can turn a simple safety solution into a years-long legal ordeal. Keep that in mind, because it explains a great deal of what follows. This was never going to be a straightforward conversation. Go back to 2021. Clarkson submits a planning application for a restaurant near the farm shop. Refused. Most people in his position would have walked away. Instead, in August 2022, he opens a 40-cover restaurant inside a building called Land Barn, using permitted development rights, the exact same legal mechanism available to any landowner attempting to bring a redundant agricultural building back into productive use. He wasn't concealing anything. He confirmed it himself in writing shortly after. And it's worth being clear about what permitted development rights actually are. They're not a loophole. They're a deliberate part of the planning framework, created specifically so that farmers and rural landowners can adapt existing structures without having to fight through the full application process every single time. Clarkson used a tool the law gave him. That's not defiance, that's pragmatism. 12 days into that August, the council issues an enforcement notice. The restaurant shuts down within roughly a month of opening. Consider what that actually cost, not in abstract terms. In Clarkson's own words, he had to sell most of the cattle he'd bought and return to using chemicals, precisely what he'd been working to move away from. He stated plainly that he no longer wished to open a restaurant. That's a farmer whose entire supply chain for a beef-based menu collapsed virtually overnight. Forced back onto artificial inputs he'd deliberately been phasing out. A diversification project designed to support British farming, gone within weeks. And here's the part that tends to get lost in the noise around Clarkson's celebrity. The cattle he sold weren't a vanity project. They were part of a deliberate attempt to farm more regeneratively, to reduce chemical dependency, to build a business that could demonstrate sustainable farming was commercially viable. That experiment ended, not because it failed on its own terms, but because a building was used in a way the council objected to. The knock-on consequences went far beyond the restaurant itself. By January 2023, Clarkson writes to the council to lay out his position unambiguously. They have no desire to expand the on-site businesses further. They're content with what they have. Contrary to what some people are claiming, he has no intention of turning Diddly Squad into a theme park. It is, after all, where he lives. But what they genuinely do need is on-site parking. Read that carefully. He isn't asking for an empire. He's asking to prevent his own visitors from clogging up a narrow country lane outside his front gate. There's a version of this story where a wealthy celebrity, stung by a planning refusal, doubles down and goes to war with the local authority. That's not what happened here. What happened is that Clarkson absorbed a significant financial and emotional hit, scaled back his ambitions, and made a single, reasonable ask. The council's response to that ask is the story, and when the enforcement notice against the restaurant was upheld anyway, he appealed it alongside a separate refusal on the car park. That's not a contradiction. That's someone who attempted to absorb a bad outcome quietly, then decided his livelihood was worth defending when he saw the actual consequences of letting it go. Any farmer facing the same situation would likely have done the same. The difference is that most farmers don't have the legal budget to appeal, and most farmers don't have a production company documenting every stage of the fight. The structural unfairness in that reality is worth acknowledging even while we focus on Clarkson's specific case. The appeal hearing runs across 2 days in March 2023, with Planning Inspector R.J. Pern visiting the site on 2 separate occasions. 2 visits, a formal 2-day hearing, for a car park and a barn. That level of scrutiny would be entirely appropriate for a major development in a sensitive landscape. It feels somewhat disproportionate for a gravel rectangle and a farm building that everyone, including the council's own highways advisors, had already identified as beneficial. On the restaurant, Pern rules against Clarkson. 6 weeks to remove everything. His words were that 6 weeks is more than sufficient to restore the surrounding land to the condition it was in before the breach occurred. 6 weeks for a business that employed local people and sold local produce, in an industry that can barely survive unpredictable weather and declining subsidies as it is. There's a human cost embedded in that 6-week deadline that never really makes the headlines. The people who worked there, the local suppliers who'd started selling through that kitchen, the small ecosystem of rural commerce that a functioning farm restaurant can quietly sustain. All of it unwound on a timer. But on the car park, the one matter that was genuinely about public safety, about keeping vehicles off a country lane, Pern approves it. He grants an extension to the existing parking area, formalizes the temporary provision, permits revised access arrangements, and allows a small cafe attached to the lambing shed alongside it. Even the inspector ruling against Clarkson on the restaurant could see that the parking had never been the problem. It was the solution, and that distinction matters enormously, because it tells you that even within the formal planning process, with full knowledge of the site and the history, a qualified professional looked at the car park and concluded it was simply the right call. 3 years from June 2023. That window closes around 2026. Clarkson isn't coming to the council with something new. He's asking them not to switch off something that's already working. Something that has worked, without incident, for 3 years. Something the roads authority actively wants to see continued. Here's where it turns again. Because this isn't the first time Clarkson has had to return to the same council, asking permission to keep his own visitors safe. Back in February 2023, before the inspector had even ruled, there was already an earlier application for a temporary car park running until January 2025. 70 spaces, 4 rows, a 60 by 32 meter field. Then the ruling gave him a different 3-year window, out to around 2026. Now in 2026, he's back again, asking to extend to 2030. 3 separate applications for the same patch of gravel. A facility that Oxfordshire's own highways authority confirms prevents dangerous roadside parking outside the farm. Think about what that actually means in practical terms. Every time one of these applications has to be submitted, there are legal fees, planning consultants, highways reports, correspondence, site assessments. Each round costs money and time that a normal working farmer simply would not have. The system, as it currently operates, effectively rewards deep pockets and punishes everyone else. Clarkson can afford to fight this. Most farmers cannot. Think about what that means. A man identified a genuine problem. His farm's popularity was creating a road safety hazard, solved it, and has since had to re-justify that same solution 3 times in 3 years. That's not Clarkson prolonging this. That's a planning system incapable of committing to a decision for more than a few years at a stretch, forcing a working farmer back to square one repeatedly for something that was never remotely controversial. If the council's own highways authority had flagged the car park as problematic at any point in those 3 years, the case for renewal would be far less clear. But that hasn't happened. The car park has done its job. The road has been safer for it. And yet here we are again. And here's the part the council itself cannot dispute, because they're the ones who said it. In 2023, they acknowledged that the planning process depicted in Season 2 of Clarkson's farm can appear obstructive. Not might appear, can appear, their word. They then insisted that like any other planning authority, they carry a legal duty to ensure planning laws and policies are correctly followed by everyone, regardless of who they are, and that Diddly Squat Farm receives no different treatment. That's a defensible position in isolation. Planning law should apply equally to everyone. But equal application of the law isn't the same as sensible application of the law, and there's a meaningful gap between those two things that this case sits squarely inside. But then in 2024, they went further and practically acknowledged the car park dispute never needed to happen at all. They stated they had encouraged Diddly Squat Farm to make an application for a temporary car park long before the appeal. Read that again. The council is on record saying they told him to pursue parking. He did, and it still required a formal appeal, a 2-day hearing, and 2 site inspections to actually get it approved. If they believed a car park was the right outcome before the appeal even began, why did it take an inspector to make it happen? That's not a rhetorical question. It's a genuine procedural failure that the council's own words expose. You can't simultaneously say you encourage someone to apply and then make them fight through a formal appeal to get what you already knew was justified. The council's language works hard to sound reasonable, listing approvals granted, the lambing shed, a barn, the farm shop, insisting they have no desire to see the shop close, that they're pleased to see locally sourced produce being sold there. They close with the assertion that their door has always been open should Clarkson choose to work with them. There's something quietly revealing about that final line. An open door is only meaningful if what's behind it is a genuine willingness to find pragmatic solutions. The paper trail in this case suggests the door has been open, but the path through it has been deliberately long. Fine words. But words carry little weight when the actual paper trail shows a business that has had to formally contest the same basic issue 3 separate times for the one facility that everyone, the council, the highways authority, and most of the local community, accepts is necessary. Not every local voice agrees, and it would be wrong to suggest otherwise. One resident, following the restaurant closure, called it a victory for the community and argued the operation didn't belong there. That's a legitimate perspective on the record, and it deserves acknowledgement. Rural communities are not monolithic. People who live near a working farm that's also become a tourist attraction have genuine, reasonable concerns about traffic, noise, and the character of their village. Those concerns don't disappear because a celebrity is on the other side of them. But weigh it against a council that publicly admits it encouraged the car park application, a highways authority that has formally endorsed it, a business employing local people and stocking local produce, and one unhappy neighbor doesn't build the case West Oxfordshire District Council has spent 3 years failing to close. Even a county councillor said as much at the time. Liam Walker went on record supporting Clarkson's appeal outright, arguing that local councils need to recognize how dramatically farming has changed and that planning rules need to adapt accordingly to allow diversification to happen at pace. Farmers across the country deserve genuine support. That's not a fringe view. That's an elected representative looking at the same evidence and arriving at the same conclusion. And it's a conclusion that points towards something bigger than this one case. The planning framework that governs rural England was largely designed for a different agricultural era. The farms that can survive in the current climate are increasingly the ones that can diversify, that can welcome visitors, that can build income streams beyond the harvest. A planning system that treats every attempt at that diversification as a threat rather than a necessity is a system that is quietly accelerating the decline of the farming sector it's supposed to protect. Here's the detail that shifts everything, though. It isn't West Oxfordshire District Council that has shown any real conviction throughout this process. It's an entirely different authority. Oxfordshire County Council, the people whose actual job involves roads, have backed Clarkson without reservation. Their transport lead, Oliver Eden, stated it plainly. The additional car parking is a vital facility for accommodating vehicles that would otherwise likely create disruption and safety concerns on the adjacent highway. That's a specialist authority confirming in writing that Clarkson had the parking issue right from the start. Road safety is not a gray area. Either cars parked on a country lane create a hazard, or they don't. The people whose professional responsibility it is to make that call have made it, clearly and consistently. Eden went further. Oxfordshire County Council supports extending the temporary permission to align with the expected ongoing demand tied to the television series schedule. The authority responsible for road safety is telling the planning authority to stop delaying and match the permission to reality. The farm draws crowds. Crowds need somewhere to park. Pretending otherwise simply pushes the problem back onto the road. And when something goes wrong on that road, a near miss, an accident, a blocked emergency vehicle, nobody will be asking the planning committee what they were thinking, but the answer will be sitting in these documents. Clarkson's team made precisely the same point in their submission. The site continues to attract sufficient visitor numbers to justify the provision of parking and maintains the associated commercial benefits to the farm and the other local businesses that supply the shop and cafe. This isn't a celebrity making demands. This is a business owner demonstrating that other farms and suppliers are also commercially dependent on this arrangement. When Diddly Squat's car park functions, other people's livelihoods function alongside it. The supply chain that feeds into a farm shop like this one, the local cheesemakers, the honey producers, the small batch bakers, they don't appear in planning documents, but they exist, and they're quietly affected by every decision made about the facility that brings customers to them. So where does this leave things? The 2030 application remains, with West Oxfordshire District Council. Undecided, no ruling date confirmed. But look at what's actually sitting in front of them. A highways authority that has already said yes. A business that has been specific and transparent about exactly what it needs and why. A 3-year track record demonstrating that the car park does precisely what it was built to do: keep vehicles off a country lane and keep a working farm's visitors safe. A local councillor who went on record calling for change. A submission that connects the car park's survival to the commercial survival of multiple other rural businesses. The evidence doesn't point in multiple directions here. It points in one direction, consistently, from every independent voice that has looked at it. There is no credible case left against it. There's just a council that, by its own admission, has made this considerably harder than it ever needed to be. And perhaps that's the most uncomfortable truth in all of this. Not that the council is malicious, not that any individual officer has acted in bad faith, but that a system designed to protect a beautiful landscape has, in this case, spent 3 years creating paperwork obstacles around a patch of gravel that everyone already knows should be there. That's not protection. That's inertia dressed up as process. Watch for the decision. If it goes the way the evidence points, it won't be a victory handed to Clarkson. It'll simply be the council finally catching up to what the Highways Authority, the local councillor, and even West Oxfordshire's own past statements had already acknowledged long ago. And if it doesn't, if this goes to a 4th application, a 4th round of reports and hearings and site visits for the same piece of ground, then the story we'll be telling here on Clarkson's Empire isn't really about Jeremy Clarkson anymore. It'll be about what happens when a system loses the ability to recognize its own conclusions. Drop a comment below and tell us what to dig into next. The pub's numbers, Hawkstone's accounts, or should we come straight back here on Clarkson's Empire the moment West Oxfordshire finally makes a call?